Welcome to Speak Up. This week I'll be talking to Chineye and Ambeya, who are from our time. I'm going to pass over the mic to them so they can introduce themselves and tell us a bit about the work that they've been doing and their experience with mental health.
Like Pauline said, I am from Our Time, and Our Time is a charity that supports children who look after a parent with a mental illness. I've been involved with this charity for a long time. I was a service user beneficiary and I set up a group for teenagers, and it was basically just to sort of talk about issues pertaining their experiences having a parent with a mental illness, and talk about other issues that they would like to talk about that may not necessarily involve mental illness. So for example, things like how to deal with peer pressure at school, or other topics pertaining to having a parent with a mental illness, like how to prepare and manage in the crisis situation. So after that, I then became a trustee, member of the board of trustee of the charity. And ever since, I've been working in that field ever since.
My name's Ambeya. I'm also from Our Time. Unlike Chineye, I wasn't a service user. I used to go to a young carers group in my secondary school because I've got a parent with a mental illness, and the founder of Our Time came to witness what the young carers group was like, in terms of what activities we do, what we speak about, and from there he asked me if I wanted to volunteer for the charity. So I came in as a charity volunteer, and I used to go to the monthly workshops and supported the children with their acting. I also attended some of the parents groups where the parents discuss and give advice to each other on how to deal with their mental illness. And I used to attend the teen group with Chineye in terms of discussing school issues and how school affects them whilst they're growing up. And then from being a volunteer, like Chineye, they wanted young people to be on the board, because at the end of the day it's the young people that are driving the charity. So I've gone in as a trustee as well, and I've been a trustee since. I try and get involved as much as I can, and I also try and do fundraising activities to support the charity and raise money.
Great, amazing. And I guess one of the first questions I have is, when was the first time you actually got involved with Our Time, and what age was that at, and what benefits did it have for you both?
Do you know, I still can't remember what age exactly I was, but I'm going to go with 14 or 13, 14. So I remember I was at home, and I think a social worker came to visit us and informed us about Our Time. At that time, it was called Kids Time. So he didn't really say much about it. He just said he thought we would benefit from it. Yeah, so at that time, what I really liked about it was the setup. It was very much a fun atmosphere, a relaxed atmosphere, but at the same time, you felt like you belong to something. And at the same time, I felt I could talk about what I was experiencing at home, because I didn't really talk about it to friends or to my mum either. So mainly talked about it there at the workshop.
So for me, I attended a young carers group when I was around 16 years old, and I think I started getting involved with Our Time from the age of 17. So for me, whilst I was younger, so from the age of 11 onwards, I used to have a counsellor at the school, and I used to speak to my form tutor. So that was my way of explaining what was going on and how I was feeling. And it was only when I started working with Our Time, I realised the benefits of talking. So whilst I was growing up, I didn't have, unlike Chineye, so Chineye met kids who were in the same situation or similar situation to her, and I didn't have that because back then kids didn't want to speak about their issues at home, so they didn't want to speak about mental illness or if there was something wrong with their parents. So I never came across any children or kids my age who were going through that. So when I joined Our Time, even though I attended the voluntary session monthly workshops, the kids that I met, for me, I found that therapeutic, because I realised that even though I'm much older than them, I've met people that were going through the same thing as me, and it made me feel like I wasn't alone. So in terms of how Our Time's benefited me in that way, I've actually I found it therapeutic, and I've been able to use my own experiences in helping these kids, because at the end of the day, no child should go through those situations.
I think it might be useful to describe the setup. So, like I said, it's very much a relaxed atmosphere. So to begin with, you have the parents and the children sort of get to know each other. Parents mix, get to know each other. And then the dramatist then sort of brings up a topic of the day. The groups split up into the parent group and the children's group. The parents talk about the topic of the day, and the children create a drama. And at the end, everyone reconvenes and watches the filmed drama that the children create, talk about it over pizza. So it's very much busy environment, because you see kids, talking loudly and being free and, just playing with each other. I think that's the bit about it that's most useful. So you hear about play therapy or drama therapy. It's not sort of set up as a therapy. It's more set up as an environment where children can be kids, and I think that's really important. If you look at play, there's a reason why there's a lot of research around play. There's a reason why it's useful for kids, because that's the time where they can just be stimulated. Children need a stimulated environment, an environment where they don't have to think about, deadlines or their responsibilities. So just an atmosphere for them to be kids. And I think that's really important. And also in that process of putting the drama together, there is some learning going on there about what mental illness is and the symptoms that a parent might experience, but it's in a very it's discussed in a language that's appropriate for the children. And I think when children understand what mental illness is about, they don't create a sinister idea of what it could be. So they have a good an age-appropriate understanding of mental illness, and I think that's useful for them.
I think there's something quite special about being able to go in with your parent and then have that time to both sort of like be separated for a bit, and understanding that your parent is about to have that space and learning about what mental illness is, because I think we don't really get to have the privilege to learn about that ever. I think you just get confronted that in life. If you know someone who's got mental health difficulties, then that's how you learn about it. So it is, I think it's amazing. And in terms of like the organisation, so like what kind of age range is it, and what do you think it's done for you now, like reflecting back as an adult?
So the age, I think, ranges. There isn't necessarily a lower age limit, because if a parent has a child that there's no one to look after, they'll bring the child along. But I think it's somewhere between 4, 5 to 19, I think. Okay, so if I reflect back on when I was that young, I knew there wasn't something quite right. I knew that my life was different. My family setup was different to my friends. And I was, although I was being affected, I didn't know that I was being impacted. But on reflection, I realised now that I was impacted more then than now. So I was more withdrawn. At that time, I didn't want to sort of be seen in a way. I just wanted to hide in any way possible. So in a social setting, I'll be very quiet. I wouldn't say anything, because I didn't want this, in a way, I didn't want the spotlight to be on me, because I felt that would mean that people would know what I'm experiencing. If they know what I'm experiencing, they will see me as not good enough. So being in that environment where you were vulnerably seen, people know your life experience and still treat you really well, like a human being. I felt like I was special. The professionals there, made it, try to make us feel, they gave us a lot of attention, made us feel good, made us, feel like we were special. And so I became very comfortable talking about my experiences, talking about maybe difficulties that I was experiencing. And I think that was sort of freeing in a way and therapeutic for me, being able to express myself and feel like I am, I'm good enough and I belong to something. And I think I felt very empowered, sort of setting up that teens group when I was a teen myself. I felt like, it's not all bad. some good can come out of it. So on reflection, I feel like that environment has empowered me and gave me a sense of direction, because now I work in the field of psychology. It made me feel like, I've been through things and I can give back.
Before I answer your question, I just want to go back to something that you said earlier. So you were saying how it's so amazing to be in an environment where parents and children can be together and discuss parental mental illness. So obviously for me, I didn't have that chance because I didn't attend the Our Time workshops with my family or with my siblings. So I lost out on that key element of Our Time. So, kids go in with their parents. So that whole aspect I missed out on because I didn't know Our Time existed. So if I had attended Our Time as a kid, I would have been able to build a relationship with my mum, because when I was younger, the services that were there, I wasn't told how to form a relationship with my mum. Like, no one taught me how to do it. And I feel that's only because we didn't discuss mental health in our family. So it was a topic that was avoided. So we used to deal with it, get on with our lives. No one said how to speak to her or what to do. And we did the main things, like give her medicine and make sure she goes to bed and everything. But we weren't told how to deal with her mental illness and form a relationship. So for me, when I joined Our Time, so I'm an adult now, so when I joined Our Time as a volunteer, one of the benefits that I had is I was able to witness what my life could have been like if I had a relationship with my mum. And when I joined, in terms of the volunteering, that was a point in my life where my mum was actually taken away from the home. So her illness got so severe to the point where she actually was incapable of looking after us, and she was removed from the household, and she's been in rehab since. So for me, it was quite a dark time for me because I actually didn't know what to do. Like, I built all these skills and I've learned so much on how to build resilience because my mum was the main reason I'd become so strong. And for that part of my life to leave, I just didn't know how to cope. So I came to Our Time, and that's why I mentioned that it was therapeutic, because I was still able to express my feelings through helping other kids. So that's something that I think has helped me as an adult, and I've learned so much more about things. And there was feelings that I probably was feeling before that I hadn't opened up to, and I opened up to it in Our Time. So just talking to the children and realising, oh my God, that's how I feel as well. But I never knew because no one told me. It's one of those things where sometimes being with Our Time, it makes you realise feelings that you don't have, and that's because they explain mental health to you in a way where it's understandable and makes you think. And I think for me, because my situation's quite different, I've used it as a way of helping me grow even more. So now I try and do as much campaigning in mental health as possible, because at the end of the day, mental health, it affects everything. It's not just your mind, it affects your social life, it affects your work life, it just affects everything. So I'm a strong believer in campaigning for mental health, because at the end of the day, if you don't deal with it, like, there are severe consequences, and that's something that I've wanted to avoid. So at the time when my mum did leave, and I was using Our Time as a way of coping, I did have some mental health issues myself, so I did develop PTSD. And I think if it wasn't for Our Time, I don't think I would have been able to have the recovery that I did have. So I used Our Time to help me with my mental health problems rather than understanding my mum's mental health problems.
And I think also, to add to that, Ambeya said that she didn't attend Our Time, and she didn't know how to talk about mental illness with her mum. I didn't go with my mum, and my mum's personality is such that she doesn't really like talking about anything to do with feelings, emotions, things like that. She's very sort of practical in that sense. So although I didn't talk to my mum much about mental illness then, I think what was really useful for me is that environment normalised mental illness. And because it is normal to have mental illness, but at that time you think, oh my God, I'm the only one who's going through this. And you think your mum is the only one who has a mental illness. But sort of being educated about the stats, the amount of people that do have a mental illness, 1 in 4 people suffer from depression, 1 in 3 suffer from anxiety. You feel, I felt normal. I felt like I was just like any other kid. So, and again, I think that was very helpful for me and other young people, because, you know, you think that people who go through difficulties in life will amount to nothing, but then seeing other people there who were, you know, achieving at school, achieving in their personal life, you know, was kind of encouraging for me and very comforting. I realised that, you know, this doesn't have to be a stumbling block that would stop me from achieving and, you know, going somewhere in life.
I'm the eldest in my family, so it's me, and I've got 2 younger brothers. So I'm 24. I've got a brother that's 22 and a brother that's 17. My mum, she suffers from bipolar and schizophrenia. So her illness got really bad to the point where, you know, we were always under child protection, or she was always sectioned, or she was never at home because she couldn't look after us. So growing up, we used to have an auntie that used to live with us, and she was mainly the one who was doing the mother role in the family. So she looked after us for a while, and then she left when I was around 14. So my mum, she was diagnosed with her illness when I was 8. So I've been a carer for over 10 years now. And when my auntie left, that's when I started feeling the pressure, because even though we were dealing with her illness whilst my auntie was with us, when she left, that's when I had to actually pick up the mother role, because no one else was going to do it for us. So I've been caring for my mum, and also playing the parent role in my family for my younger brothers. And for me, it was difficult only because I live in an area when you have a parent with mental illness, everyone knows about the situation. You can't hide it. You live in an area where, you know, your next door neighbour goes to the same school as you, or the kids you play with in the park live near you. So we couldn't hide our situation. So we were felt to be embarrassed, and my dad always tried to tell us, like, you know, he always used to keep us at home, because he was like, if you go out, people are going to spread rumours, or they're going to gossip. So I lost my childhood in that sense, because we had to stay back at home. And coming from a Muslim background and being Asian, mental health wasn't really looked at in our society. It was always a taboo. We weren't allowed to talk about it, and if you did talk about it, you were literally like you had to stop talking about it. And that made it even more difficult, because we were literally holding back our feelings, because we weren't allowed to talk about our feelings. So it did affect school as well. So obviously with my mum's illness, she used to talk to herself. She used to speak in a different language. She used to not sleep. She was constantly awake. She would increase her drinking of tea and coffee, so the caffeine was just keeping her going. So for all those reasons, it made it difficult for us to sleep as well. So I used to go into school and I used to fall asleep in class, or, you know, because I was so awake but tired at the same time. Like, I couldn't eat, I just didn't feel hungry. So it impacted my health in terms of, you know, lack of sleep, lack of food. But the one thing that I appreciate is my dad has always said that education is a sanctuary. So if you go to school, like, that should be your second home. So that's what I used to do. So me and my brothers, even though life at home was bad, we still used to go to school, and we used to still, you know, try and be kids at school. And, you know, we were still motivated to work harder, because I think one thing is young carers, a lot of the time people look down at them and think that, oh, because their parents got mental illness, it's going to affect them as well. They're not going to be able to do as well in school like normal kids. So that's one thing that used to drive us. So, you know, people used to always look down at us and say, oh, these kids aren't going to do well. So we use that as a motivation for us to keep going, because at the end of the day, young carers are still kids as well, and they should be able to have the same abilities as a normal child. So I think for me, growing up with a parent with a mental illness, even though it's had its downfalls, like, no one wants to be in that position, I've taken it as a positive, because I feel like if I wasn't a carer, I wouldn't be doing what I'd be doing today.
Okay, so I am the youngest child in the family, and I have an older sister. And when I was born, my mum was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I think that deteriorated and she developed schizophrenia. So it's my mum is very loving, very nurturing, and she's the kind of person that would that smothers us with love. And I think that is because of the guilt. She knew she wasn't well, and she, at that time, was very difficult for her to manage her mental illness because she wasn't taking her medication, and she hated taking her medication. And I think things have improved now. So she's getting better support, better quality support, as opposed to then. Her support wasn't as good as it is now. So when my mum used to have a relapse, she would be gone for a very long time. So maybe 6 months sometimes. And when she's away from the home, we wouldn't know what hospital she was. It's a lot of sort of fuss to find out where she is and whether we can go and visit her. Me and my sister would always try and endeavour to call the crisis team when she falls ill. So the bad times are really when she had a relapse, but when she's well, it's a loving relationship with her. There were embarrassing moments, so because of her, she's lovely and everything, but she's very loud, and she does really embarrassing things. I remember once I was on the bus and I went to the top deck and she was at the bottom deck, and when it was our stop, she screamed my name. And it was really, really embarrassing. So those moments were really, really embarrassing. And there were times where I didn't want my mum to be next to me because she would really embarrass me, and I didn't know how to sort of cope with it. She's much better now, and now I can deal with it better, and I'm used to that sort of embarrassment. But then I had moments like that was not fun to deal with. And in terms of when we were much younger, I think we struggled more, and that's where Kids Time helped us. So the people, the staff there acted like advocates for us. So I remember once when my mum was in hospital, I think the social workers were deciding whether to take us to foster care or not. So they would come into the house, look after, just stay with us for a bit. And I remember once they gave us some money and we ran out of the money, so we didn't have any food. And of course, we didn't know who to contact because we didn't have their number. So we contacted a member of staff at Kids Time, and then they sorted for someone to come round and give us some money. So those were the sort of difficulties that we had then. But in terms of the relationship with my mum, it's always been a nice relationship.
Okay, I think one of the main advice that I would give to a young person is to talk. I think what young people do these days is they just don't want to open up. They feel like if you open up about your feelings, you're classed as weak, when you're not. Like, if you open up, the more you open up, the stronger you get. So I think the main advice that I would give is to just speak, even if it's just to your friend or to someone who you're close with. Just talk to them and just explain how you're feeling, because the more you bottle up, the more it hurts. And I think whilst nowadays there's so much out there that you can use to help you. So even though we still had social media and everything when we were younger, nowadays, there's more people are starting to talk, and everyone's writing blogs about how they're feeling, or they're making podcasts like this, or there's meditation or mindfulness or all these other things that you can do to help your mental health, which we didn't have when we were younger. We've only just started experiencing these things now. So I think the main thing is to just talk, and also reach out, because there are other people that are feeling the same as you. And I think people with a mental illness, they feel that no one out there is going to understand what they feel. Like, you always hear the phrase, "Oh, no one understands me," or no one knows what I'm going through. But there is, and you will never be able to find out if you don't talk. So that's the main thing, I think, in terms of advice for young people, because I think more recently I feel like suicide and self-harm, they're all increasing, and that's only because social media, there's influences everywhere, and it all affects your mental health. So I think the more you talk, the more it will help you, and it is classed as therapy. So if you do have the opportunity to do that, because I think before, the services that used to exist, you wouldn't be able to, now, there's counselling, there's therapy, that, you can have one-to-one services, and even though it's still long to get those services, they're still available. So literally take every opportunity you have and make the most of the services that exist, because if we don't use them, then who is?
So my advice would be to stay connected with friends at school, family members, obviously people that you trust. There's always support around us, but when we're down, when we're going through things, we often think that we're the only one going through it. But the moment you reach out to someone, it takes a lot of courage to do that, but when you take that first step, it will be easier to do it again, to reach out to someone and ask for help. I would say also a way in which you can build resilience is to find a balance in your routine. And, there's a lot of pressure these days to, at school, exams, and then you come home, you have to look after mum or dad or sibling. So it's useful to find another activity that's pleasurable, that does not have any sort of deadlines or stress or anxiety attached to it. When I was growing up, what really helped me was drawing, songwriting, and I was part of a band, and that's I derived joy and pleasure from that, and that created a balance for me. And that was an atmosphere where I didn't have to think about the problems at home. And I think it's very useful to find that balance, find that place where you can be taken somewhere else mentally, and somewhere where you can actually derive pleasure and enjoyment from. I just want to say that it's normal to feel down, especially if your parent is having a relapse. It's a natural thing. We can't stop it. You will feel down. You will feel anxious. But just remember that you don't have to remain there, and see it as normal. It's something. We don't want to fear those emotions. Those are things that unfortunately we have to feel to overcome. So when you notice that you're going through a lot of pain, embrace the pain, but it's your duty to ensure that you don't stay there. So that might mean finding different ways to get out of that place through your hobbies, through pleasurable activities, through a mentor, through a teacher, through a friend, through another family member. So when you feel those emotions, it's normal. See it as normal, but don't stay there.
Yeah. And also saying that there's not just one solution to it all. Like, there's so many different ways. So if one way doesn't work, it doesn't mean give up. Always find an alternative. Like, if something doesn't work for you, try something else. And I think that's what young people don't understand. They just think that, okay, it's not working for me, it's never going to work, and that's what keeps them in that position. So yeah, trying alternatives and making yourself aware that there is other things that you can do that will work for you, because not the same thing's not going to work for everyone. I'm an old-time dormouse in a big house.
The label carer is something that some young people identify with, but some don't. So sometimes people are put off by that label carer. So just wanted to raise that awareness that even though you don't identify as a carer, you don't like that label, the advice still applies. If you're in an environment where mum's ill or siblings ill, you still have to look after yourself, even though you don't feel like you're a carer, you don't identify with that label.